Welcome back to War Thunder and welcome to the tank review on the medium tank M4A3 76W HVSS Sherman. And this is the third SDF tank that I will cover in terms of tank review. And I think this is kind of an awkward tank to review, and it is very important to understand the circumstances it plays in. That might not sound so obvious as it is not very popular to get to tell something about the tanks, where they stand and what they face and where the meta of the game stands, and if that favors the tank or it disfavors it. And in terms of arcade, it's quite a nice tank to have, but you know what you do. In realistic, however, it is very important if you play the American one, or in this case the Japanese one, because they have so different circumstances, and I think it's quite hard to play the American, where it is a bit easier, in my opinion, to play the Japanese one, in realistic that is. Now let's have first a look at the tech tree, and we can see that the M4A3 76W, the Sherman, has an awkward position. First of all, it's the only medium tank in a tank line that has exclusively light tanks, and with the exception of the Type 60, but that kind of is also a light tank slash tank destroyer hybrid, depends on the exact definition, unique armament. But going back to the M4A3, it is a medium tank in a light tank branch. It comes after the fantastic M24 Chaffee, which has a battle rating of just 3.7. Then we have a battle rating jump of 1.6 to 5.3. And then again a battle rating jump of an entire battle rating, 1.0, to the decent M41 Walker Bulldog. And that is kind of a problem, because this tank is, together with the Chiri, the only one in that 5.0, 5.3 bracket. So you have kind of a problem in terms of support. So after those two tanks, everything is gone, and the Chiri 2 is not the most easy tank to make work. If you don't know how to make the tank, the autoloader mechanism work properly, when to decide to fire off the last shell and go for the reload, and where to lie your advantages, how to push, and so on. It is difficult to make it work. And then, I think the tank overall is really good, but your arch nemesis is the T-34-85. Not just in realistic, but also in arcade. And it is, in my opinion, not a fair fight, because the T-34-85 has so many advantages in the reality of on the battlefield. It is very difficult to go head-on against the T-34-85 and win. And it is a bit difficult to flank another medium tank. But this is actually the key. You kind of have to flank the enemy, get side shots, go into medium tank wolf packs, cover each other. That sounds fine in theory. It's so hard to make it work properly, in the battle. But that's enough rambling. Let's get on with the tank review. And so we can see that both the upper hull and here the lower part is effectively something between 90 and 95 millimeters thick, with this bar here just exceeding 100 millimeters up to 111, and the lower plate having around 120 millimeters of effective armor, depending on where you exactly look at. The machine gun port is a weak spot, but overall the hull is not very sturdy, so everything might go right through it. You might think of angling, bad idea, because the side armor is very squishy, just 38.1 millimeters, even behind the tracks and so on. You have additional cover by the tracks and those structural steel of chassis and so on, but it really doesn't help you. You're very vulnerable even to AAA. I had many instances where even certain AAAs just shred you from the front. The rear also 38.1 millimeters thick. The top of both the or just the tank itself, the engine deck and the front, is 19.5. Very big high explosive shells will go through, but it's not very thin, to be honest. Then we have the rooftop of the turret, 25.4 millimeters. Not the worst. It's actually pretty decent. Then let's talk about the turret. Well, the turret itself has turret cheeks and sides of 63.5 millimeters. That's like nearly twice as thick as the side armor, and gives you a bit more protection against certain AAAs. In comparison, the turret front itself is 88.9. That doesn't sound too bad, but it's completely 100% flat. There is a little bit of turret ring going on, but it's a really small target, so you can't rely on it. The turret front itself is 63 millimeters, and below the gun mantle, it is also relatively flat. There are a few areas of overlay, but right next to the gun, to the right side and to the left side, if you shoot it, you just have around about 90 millimeters of effective armor. The rooftop is not a very good target like the Commander's cupola. Don't shoot here; you have a high chance of ricocheting or just missing it. It's well angled, well rounded. So don't go for there if you have other options to choose to shoot at. And just when you are in a T-34-85, literally just shoot the tank and you will instant kill it. Then let's go to the X-ray, and we can see that in theory this tank has a nice chance of surviving. We have 3 crew members, of which 2 are in the front, the machine gunner on the left hand side and the driver on the right hand side, together with a bit of transmission in front of them. So if you try to snipe one through the lower plate, the transmission might just catch the shrapnels that might kill the driver or the machine gunner. Then we have the loader on the right hand side and the gunner together with the commander on the left hand side. We have this prominent cannon breech and the turret ring. Both are very vulnerable to damage. Then we have those big fuel tanks and this engine in the rear of the tank. One final thing to note is that we have actually pretty nice ammo racks. We have 71 rounds in total in this tank, and you should just remove 5 of them to empty this ammo rack, and then you still have enough ammunition in those ammo racks, and they are relatively close together. Removing a lot of ammunition does not really make sense, in my opinion, because it really does not enhance the survivability. In rare cases, you might just have a benefit from emptying the ammunition, but the golden rule in this tank is to not get shot in the first place. So you might remove more than half of the ammunition, but I can tell you, in good games, you can run through your ammunition very quickly. So that's the armor, which is not very nice, and also the interior, which is in theory nice. In practice, you will get one-shotted very, very often. So now let's talk a little bit about the mobility, and overall I have to say the mobility is decent but not spectacular, and in many respects it's kind of average. For example, the horsepower with 500 horsepower is really not the worst, but it also is not the best. As well as the weight. The weight is with 33.4 tons, kind of in the golden middle, and there is a spectacular example here when you compare it to the Germans, the Panzer IV and the Panther D. The Panzer IV has less horsepower, the Panther D has more. The Panzer IV-H weighs much less, but the Panther weighs much more than the Sherman, and both have a lower horsepower to ton ratio than the M4A3, which has 15 horsepower per ton dead on. The top speed is with 41 kilometers an hour a bit underwhelming. It certainly outclasses the Panzer IV-H just by a little bit, but because of the significantly higher horsepower to ton ratio by nearly 23%, you just are so much more mobile than the Panzer IV-H, at least when you go forwards, because backwards the reverse speeds of all those tanks in this comparison is not really spectacular. Just the Panzer IV-H finally and the T-34-85, which is its arch nemesis on the battlefield, they kind of are much better with 7 and 8 kilometers an hour respectively backwards. Furthermore, the Comet and the Panther D have not just better top speed, but they also have neutral steering above the M4A3. So while the mobility of the M4A3 is relatively good, the maneuverability in close quarters is not the best. And so that kind of is not a good thing when you consider that the armor on this tank is quite squishy. It's, easy to overcome. It can't angle. Hull down is not really an option despite the 10 degrees of gun depression, to which we will come later on. So this tank is certainly not spectacularly good, but it also has no big weakness in terms of mobility. And now let's talk a little bit about the business end of the M4A3 76, and that is the gun. Obviously we have here the well-known 76.2mm M1 cannon with 71 shells in total and a reload rate of 5.9 seconds for an ace crew, that is. And as you can see, those stats are not really uncommon. As I pointed out in the X-ray review, so to speak, the amount of ammunition is all there, so you just have to remove like 5 shells. That leaves you with 66 shells, which should be sufficient for a normal battle. And just the Comet and the T-34-85 have significantly less shells than that, and just the Panzer IV-H and the Panther D have significantly more than the M4A3. The reload rate is kind of average. Just the Panther D and the T-34-85 have significantly longer reloads with 7.4 and 8.3 seconds respectively. That gives you between 20 and nearly 30% reload advantage over your opponents in this respect if you face them. By the way, those stats also apply to the American version, of course, and also to the Russian M4A2, the premium version, that has the very same exact stats. For the turret rotation speed, I have to say it is on the rather quick side with 22, to be honest, with around 24 degrees per second for an ace crew. Now, up until this point, I always took my stats, and I have to say I might change that, but overall you see that between the Sherman variants, the M4A3, the M4A2 and the Sherman Firefly, there are no significant differences in terms of turret rotation speed, but the Comet, the Panzer IV and the Panther D have significantly lower turret rotation speeds with somewhere between 37 and up to 74% difference. Surprisingly enough, the T-34-85 with this big gun actually has nearly the same turret rotation speed. The gun depression is with minus 10 degrees is just second to the Comet, but 10 degrees is kind of the golden standards of tanks. If you have 10 degrees of gun depression, you can do ridgeline working, you can look over cover when you wiggle up your tank a little bit. Also, the spectacular 25 degrees of gun elevation allows you to shoot at aircraft if necessary, or if you get immobilized on a downward facing ridgeline, so to speak, you still can shoot at your opponents if you have enough time to elevate the gun. Just the T-34-85 again has better gun elevation with 28 degrees. So overall, the gun handling seems to be fine. And there then comes kind of a segment in how big the difference between stock performance and fully upgraded performance is. First of all, the mobility stock is not that great. The upgrades, especially the engine, the filters and the transmission, really help the mobility out greatly, at least forwards. In backwards and in terms of maneuverability, not so great, but you know, from A to B it really helps out, especially under difficult conditions. And then you actually see your top speed. For the firepower, I have to say the stock 76mm M1 cannon is really inaccurate. And then let's talk about the ammunition. The first shell type is the M42A1 shell, which is the high explosive shell. 7mm of penetration against all angles at any distance is not very good. Actually, your top mounted 50 caliber, which is commanded by the commander or used by the commander, does a better job of taking out those pesky AAA trucks than this high explosive shell. 800 meters per second muzzle velocity is actually not the worst muzzle velocity. The second stock shell is the M62 shell, which is an APCBC APHE shell. Surprisingly enough, the APHE shell in this case is the stock shell in comparison to the American M3 75mm gun that where you have to research the APHE shell first, and that is then your bread and butter. But again, you have with 792 meters per second a decent muzzle velocity, bit slower than the high explosive shell, but 73.6 grams of TNT equivalent with around about 127 millimeters of penetration at close quarters is not a bad shell, and it is actually your major damage dealer, especially for side shots. Just use this shell. The problem with this shell in the comparison to all the other tanks, the Panzer IV in particular, and also the T-34-85, the M62 shell is the APHE shell in this comparison with the lowest penetration. And a lot of the tanks that you will face can absorb this shell in the armor, especially at distance or when they're angled or when you don't exactly hit the weak spot. Also, I have never encountered an APHE shell that gets absorbed by tracks or by strange armor plates as often as this one, and that can lead to a high frustration and might get you killed despite your really great rate of fire. So it is the best shell to use once you have a target that is not really that armored. If you have to deal with more armored targets, you have the option of upgrading your shells. The first researchable shell is the M79 shot, which is a pure AP shot, and with 792 meters per second it has the exact same muzzle velocity as the APHE shell, and with 155 millimeters of initial penetration it is actually not too bad, and you should consider to take a few of those shells with you when you have to deal with, for example, T-34-85s at long distance, because this shell might just be the difference between a penetration and non-penetration. And it puts you in terms of penetration for solid shots even above the Panzer IV or even the Chiri in this comparison. But it is not quite good enough. And so the last researchable shell is the M93 shot, which is an APCR shell. It is a follow-up upgrade, so you first have to research the AP shell anyway, but then it is kind of difficult to fully recommend the shell. Let me explain this. With 1036 meters per second, it is really great to lead and to aim. That is even faster than the APHE shell on the long 88, and the penetration with 221 is around about the same penetration value that you get from the APCR shell on the German 88, for example on the Tiger E. So the penetration is really great. Remember, the Tiger E is a German 6.0 heavy tank, and you get basically the same penetration on a 5.3 medium tank. So that gives you the impression how powerful this shell is. In comparison to your major damage dealer, the APHE shell, you get nearly 100 millimeters more of penetration. So that is kind of a key if you have to do it with very heavily armored targets, or you want to deal with somebody at long range, you know, easy to lead, a better trajectory. But of course the damage output is much lower, around about roughly the same as of the AP shell, and that is not the best damage output in the first place. Again, your damage dealer is the APHE shell. The next thing is how it works against sloped armor, and that is really bad. As long as your enemy has flat armor, you have no problem. You technically could deal with the front from of king tigers, you know, when you shoot their turret. Up to over 500 meters, you can deal with them from the front, technically. I wouldn't recommend that, but technically you could. By the way, you actually can't face Henschel king tigers. Porsche king tigers, yes, but then technically again your AP shell or even your APHE shell is technically sufficient to penetrate the turret front of the Tiger 2P, that is. So, what kind of shell mixture should you take with you? Well, first of all, you should technically take all your ammunition loadout with you except 5 shells to remove the upper ammunition rack. And then you should take like 30 to 35 APHE shells with you, no HE shells, no AP shells, and the rest you fill up with APCR shells. In most cases, you're okay with this layout. There might be some personal preferences for people that play this tank longer, but overall, it's not that much of a deal breaker. So, again, the APHE is your damage dealer, but you have to struggle with the penetration values because it is, again, in the comparison, the lowest. So, and now let's talk about some gameplay. And here we are on Eastern Europe, and you can see the enemy team is already capturing the point. And that is kind of unlucky because on this map, once the enemy does possess the capture point, it is actually pretty costly to dig them out there if they know what they're doing. In this case, I actually decided to stay on the one side of the river. Sometimes there is the option to go also on the other side to try to snipe into the city, but I try to kind of do the Overwatch thing and watch the city from above. This spot here is high risk, high reward kind of. You still can get rushed, you still can get flanked, and if somebody with armor stands below you and snipes you, you have actually little to no opportunity to reverse. And I have 2 very good shots, one into another American counterpart of mine, and then also in a Hellcat. They tried to flank, but they did not flank hard enough. So I now try to make out some spots. Then I see a shot whizzing by that looked like an APCR shell. This kind of violet lightning, so to speak, is a good indication of APCR usually. And then I see here an IS-1 in the open, it seems like, at first glance because of the bushes, but it turns out it is actually a T-34-85. And you could see I actually tried to hit the area between the machine gun port and the driver's hatch, where the armor is the thinnest, with just 45 millimeters of raw armor thickness, but I just hit the driver's hatch and it doesn't go through. But he gets killed anyway. And then I see another T-34-85 and I decide to give him a turret shot to make sure. So that was actually the disabling shot. And now you could see where I hit the flat part and he was not angled. I actually could easily penetrate him. Granted, I was a little bit above him, neglecting the effect of the armor, or the angling rather, so the armor becomes less effective. And it's just so often that just a few degrees decide if an APHE shell bounces or goes through. There's also a chance involved, and the steeper the angle of impact is, the higher the chance gets actually more and more amplified. Now, at this point, I can't do anything, but I see a AAA firing. I look around the building. I see that he is not focusing on me. He is probably tunnel visioning, so I can make the aim, and I have another kill. So that's my 4th kill right there. I totally agree with you that this gameplay is not the most fun. It is not the most intense one. And just like that, I got an ace, and that is not uncommon if you have the right spot. With a gun that has a decent APHE shell in terms of damage output, you have relatively easy side shots, and that is your bread and butter in the Sherman. This tank can die so easily in frontal engagements, and it just was too short, too slow by just a second or two to put in another shell into this T-34-85. And I actually did a bit of a misplay here. I did not mark the position of the enemy tank on the minimap, but I get him right here. And I actually made him stop just before the building so I could put another shell into the turret. It splashes down and takes him out of his misery. So that's another kill like that. So this is practically not a very exciting gameplay. Sadly, this tank wasn't dead with the first shot. That just might bite me in the butt a bit later. And you can see the Americans begin with their bombing campaign. P-47 takes out an M4A3 here in this scenario. Kind of reminds me of Arcade with this SDF tanks. And there you can see there. Is that a lag 3? I think it was a lag 3 when it has rockets. And I sadly didn't hit him with the main cannon. Again, I tried to make use of the good gun elevation. And the 50 cal sadly did not do enough damage. I scored some hits, but it sadly was not good enough. I look around and I see nothing, I see nothing, I see nothing. And again, this position is kind of exposed. I bounce a shot here. I did not really see where it came from. I was a little bit blind. There on the right hand side, you could see that he reversed just in time. And I was panicking a little bit. I did not know where this shot came from. And there he kills my driver. And he just reverses in time. But then I get another shot, it bounces, and I switch to APCR. Kind of unnecessary, because it is just a T20. I could have easily killed him there with the APHE shell, but result is result. That was my 7th kill like that. So camping hard in the right spot is your bread and butter. In direct head-on engagement, fast flanking maneuvers, you don't have the reliability of a 90mm gun, for example, like you have on the STA-1. In this respect, the STA-1 is actually better. Furthermore, I have to say this Sherman is rather tall indeed. It is higher than a Tiger. It nearly has the outer shape of a Panther tank in terms of height and length. So that gives you a good indication with which problems that you have to deal with, because the area that an enemy tank can hit you, even from a long distance, is rather big. And there I see something that I think is an IS-1, and you just could see even the side of the turret of an IS-1 is a tricky target if you fire the wrong ammunition. I switched to APCR and I missed the engine. I did not think that he would reverse in the open. With an APHE shell, this could have been a kill. And you can see, out of frustration, I switch back to the APHE ammunition. I always have just bad experiences with APCR in War Thunder. But because the APCR has so much more penetration than the AP or even the APHE shell, it is kind of worth it. And now it seems like there is nothing left in the town, so I want to end the game quickly. And I actually one-shot a T-34-85 again. I see this AAA vehicle, but he still has spawn protection, so this is why my bullets go right through. And yeah, that is kind of the battle. From this point on, nothing more spectacular happens. So then I actually go into the spawn, somebody respawns and kills me, and I get nothing more except a few kill assists. So I think that is the battle. Sadly, I jumped out of the battle after that, because the battle was over, and I did not record the results, sadly, but it was a decent amount. And I have to say that I thought I could easily get another 8, 9, even 10 kill game in this tank. But it happened to be that, in fact, I couldn't. You know, T-34-85s end your life much faster than you think. They just one-shot you out of every position, at any angle, at any distance. And even if you survive a shot, you're mostly so crippled and have to deal with so long reloads. It's not often worth, trying to repair. It sometimes is, as disgusting as it might sound, often it is more rewarding to just jump out and get into a new tank. There you can see the gunner of the AAA vehicle. And I take him out, so just 2 crew members left. But again, that's the battle, and I make a cut here. One final scene that I want to show you is how this tank actually works against planes in terms of the 50 cal performance. And as you can see, I hit this P-47 a lot with both the 50 cal and the 7.62 coaxial machine gun, and he begins to smoke, but that's about it. Again, the Chuck can take the damage, and he turns around. So, as good as the 50 cal is by strafing down AAA vehicles against aircraft, it is sadly not the best. And there you can see the great gun elevation. Lot of hits, but that's about it. Again, a few minutes later, I decide to get out of the spawn again and to just go to the cap zone because it was decaptured, and I found my master because the second I wanted to get out, somebody respawns and puts a few shells in my bag, sets me on fire, and eventually burns me down. So he also damaged my gun breech. I couldn't return fire. And that's kind of the punishment you get. The second you give somebody a chance, you get punished for it. Yeah, this is kind of an extreme angle in terms of, that he shoots me in the back, but it's kind of the same from the front. So, there you can see the results. 8 ground units and 4 kill assists. That was my score so far. Anyways, that's it for today. So thanks for watching, thanks for listening. Let me know in the comment section what you think about this tank and its tactics. Let me know if it belongs, in your opinion, into this branch of the light tanks, and if we should get kind of other tanks at this battle rating, which kind of vehicles you think about, and so on. I would love to see those comments. Furthermore, I would like to see some likes of you if you like the video, and some subscriptions if you want to see more. And that's it for today, so we'll see each other on the battlefields of War Thunder.